The Lion Who Came at Midnight. The hallways of St. Luke's Clinic were eerily quiet that December night. The small rural hospital in Willow Creek, Montana, wasn't much just a single-story building with 24 beds, a modest emergency room, and a staff that knew each resident of the town by name. But tonight, even this humble medical outpost felt like it was at the edge of the world. Nurse Caroline Evans stood by the window of the night shift station, watching as heavy snow blanketed the parking lot. At 42, her face carried the gentle lines of someone who had seen both joy and sorrow in equal measure. The silver strands woven through her dark hair caught the fluorescent light as she tucked an errant lock behind her ear. "Another 2 feet predicted by morning, Dr. Proz," Miller remarked, passing behind her with a steaming cup of coffee. "Highway patrols already closed Route 16. Nobody's getting in or out tonight." Caroline nodded, her gaze fixed on the wall of white beyond the glass. "The generator's fueled up if we lose power again. I checked it myself before my shift." Through the falling snow, the dense pines surrounding the hospital were just dark silhouettes, sentinels against the night. The harsh Montana winter had arrived early this year, burying Willow Creek under successive storms that had tested the resilience of this small community nestled between mountains and wilderness. The emergency room had been quiet for the past 3 hours, just Mr. Donovan with his chronic bronchitis earlier, and young Tommy Weber with a sprained wrist from sledding. They were both gone now, leaving only 2 patients in the overnight ward, Mrs. Patterson recovering from her hip surgery, and old Hank Miller, no relation to the doctor, with his pneumonia. Caroline made her rounds, checking vitals and adjusting blankets. 8 years had passed since she'd lost her husband Robert to a logging accident, and in all that time, these quiet night shifts had been both her burden and her comfort. The solitude suited hearth moments between patients when she could hear her own thoughts, when memories of Robert didn't sting quite so sharply. Back at the nurse's station, she organized patient charts while Nurse Jenkins, the only other staff member on duty, dozed in the break room during his designated rest period. The ancient wall clock ticked loudly in the silence. 11:54 p.m. The lights flickered once, twice, then stabilized. "Please stay on," Caroline whispered to no one in particular. The backup generator was reliable, but switching over always meant a few tense moments of darkness. As if in answer, the wind outside intensified, howling as it whipped snow against the building. Caroline paused, tilting her head slightly. She could have sworn she heard something beneath the winds while a soft scratching sound against the emergency entrance doors. Just tree branches, she thought, or ice sliding off the roof. The sound came again, more distinct this time. Not scratching, but something more deliberate, almost like clawing. Caroline set down her pen and listened. The hospital was surrounded by wilderness. Occasionally deer or even elk wandered close to the building, attracted by the warmth or light. But this sounded different. The digital clock on the wall ticked over to midnight just as the automatic doors of the emergency entrance slid open with a soft pneumatic hiss. A gust of freezing air and swirling snow burst into the lobby, and with it came an impossible sight. Caroline's hand flew to her mouth, stifling the scream that rose in her throat. Standing in the doorway, massive and magnificent, was a mountain lion. The creature filled the entrancey, a powerful, tawny-furred predator, its broad shoulders dusted with snow, golden coat glistening wet in the fluorescent lighting. Steam rose from its body as the heat of the hospital met its winter-chilled mass. Caroline's nursing instincts screamed at her to run, to hit the emergency alarm, to grab the phone, but her body remained frozen. Years of wilderness training told her that sudden movements could trigger a predator's chase response. Instead, she remained perfectly still, her eyes locked on the lion's amber, intelligent gaze. The lion lowered itself slightly, padding forward with silent grace. It was then that Caroline noticed something clutched carefully in its powerful jaws, something small, wrapped in what appeared to be a bundle of fabric. The lion moved forward, its paws making no sound against the linoleum floor. "Oh my God!" The whispered words escaped Caroline's lips before she could stop them. From the corner of her eye, she saw Nurse Jenkins emerge from the break room, his face transforming from sleepy confusion to absolute terror. "Don't," Caroline managed, raising her hand slightly toward Jenkins without taking her eyes off the lion. "Don't move, don't scream." The lion continued its slow, deliberate approach toward the nurse's station. Caroline noticed that despite its powerful build, it moved with an almost gentle caution, as if aware of its own strength. Most strikingly, there was no aggression in its demi-norno flattened ears, no bared teeth around whatever it carried. Jenkins remained frozen by the break room door, his face drained of color. What is it carrying?" he whispered. As if in answer, a tiny, weak cry emerged from the bundle in the lion's mouth. Caroline's heart nearly stopped. A baby. The lion was carrying a human baby. Every logical part of Caroline's mind rejected what she was seeing. Mountain lions were predators. They didn't rescue infants. They didn't seek out human help. This was impossible. Yet here it was, step by deliberate step, bringing its precious cargo directly to her. When the lion reached the counter of the nurse's station, it carefully raised its head. With exquisite gentleness, a gentleness Caroline would never have believed possible from such powerful jaws, it placed the bundle on the counter. The fabric was a thick flannel blanket, soaked through with snow and wrapped around a tiny form. Another soft cry emerged from within. "Jenkins," Caroline said, her voice steady despite the pounding of her heart, "go get Dr. Miller. Now, tell him we have an infant in distress." Jenkins backed away slowly, then turned and ran down the hall. Caroline and the lion regarded each other across the counter. Its amber eyes held hers, seeming to convey something beyond animal instinct and intelligence, a purpose. After a long moment, the lion slowly lowered itself to the floor, its muscular body settling with an exhausted sigh. It lay there, head on its paws, eyes still fixed on the bundle, as if standing guard. 3. Dr. Miller's voice preceded him as he hurried down the hall with Jenkins. "Jenkins says there's a what in the—" His words died as he rounded the corner and saw the massive predator lying in his hospital lobby. "Holy mother of—" "The baby first," Caroline interrupted, already unwrapping the sodden blanket with trembling hands. "The lion, it brought a baby." The doctor hesitated only a moment before professional instinct took over. He approached carefully, keeping his movements slow and deliberate as he navigated around the lion to reach Caroline's side. "Jenkins, get a warming blanket and the infant crash cart," he ordered quietly. As Caroline peeled away the final layer of wet fabric, a tiny, pale infant was Revielda newborn girl, her skin bluish and alarmingly cold to the touch. The umbilical cord had been cut, but recent, perhaps only days ago. "Severe hypothermia," Dr. Miller muttered, gently taking the infant from Caroline's hands. "Pulse is weak. Respiratory distress. Jenkins, call Memorial in Billingswee. Need to know if we should try to transport once the road's clear." Caroline watched as they rushed the baby toward the treatment room. She turned back to the lion, which remained motionless on the floor, its amber eyes following the path they had taken with the infant. "They'll help her," Caroline said softly to the lion, feeling both ridiculous and strangely compelled to reassure this wild creature. "We'll do everything we can." For nearly an hour, Caroline remained in the lobby, maintaining a respectful distance from the lion. The creature showed no signs of aggression, just profound exhaustion. It lay with its head on its paws, occasionally sighing deeply, its eyes drifting closed only to snap open again whenever there was movement in the hallway. Dr. Miller emerged from the treatment room, pulling off his gloves. "The baby's stabilizing," he reported in a low voice. "Approximately 3 days old, female. Hypothermia's responding to treatment. She's dehydrated but otherwise appears remarkably unharmed. It's..." It's a miracle she's alive." He glanced nervously at the lion. "I've called Sheriff Parker. He's trying to get here, but the roads are impassable. What do we do about that?" Caroline looked at the lion. For the first time, she noticed a minor wound on its right flank, nothing serious, but the fur was matted with blood. "It's injured," she observed, "but I think it's mainly exhausted. It's been protecting the baby somehow." Dr. Miller shook his head in disbelief. "I've lived in Montana my whole life, and I've never heard of anything like this. Mountain lions don't bring babies to hospitals, Caroline." "This one did," she replied simply. When Caroline returned from helping settle the infant in the hospital's single incubator, she found the lion gone. The emergency doors were closed, but fresh tracks in the snow led away from the hospital and back toward the dense forest. For a creature of such stealth, it had departed without a sound. Caroline stood at the glass doors, watching as the lion's tracks were already being filled in by fresh snow. A mixture of awe and confusion washed over her as she tried to make sense of what had happened. Had it all been some strange dream? But no, a baby girl fought for life in their incubator, brought to them by the most unlikely savior imaginable. IV. Morning brought momentary clarity as sunlight reflected blindingly off the fresh snow. The storm had passed, leaving behind a transformed landscape, pristine, silent, and deep. Caroline had stayed well past the end of her shift, unwilling to leave until she was certain the infant was stable. The baby's core temperature had normalized, her color improved from worrying blue to healthy pink, and she now sucked eagerly at a bottle of formula. "I've never seen anything like it, Dr. Unvez," Miller remarked, reviewing the baby's chart. "By all rights, exposure like that should have been fatal. Yet, here she is, perfectly healthy aside from mild dehydration." Caroline nodded absently, her attention focused on something she'd found when sorting through the items they'd set aside the wet blanket that had wrapped the infant. It was handmade, knitted from thick wool in a pattern of diamonds and zigzags. But, more interesting, was what she'd discovered sewn into the corner, a small pocket containing a bracelet. She held it now, turning it in the morning light. It was a simple band carved from dark wood, polished to a soft sheen from wear. Around its circumference, carefully etched letters spelled out, "For Lily, protect her, Bruno." "Bruno," Caroline whispered to herself. The lion had a name. Sheriff Parker had arrived at dawn, bringing with him tales of downed power lines, stranded vehicles, and the worst winter storm to hit Willow Creek in decades. When told about the midnight visitor, he'd been skeptical until shown the massive paw prints still visible in the sheltered area near the emergency entrance. "I've got men checking the backwoods roads and cabins," he informed them. "Someone must be missing this child. Word's gone out to rangers and the county sheriff departments, too." Caroline fingered the wooden bracelet thoughtfully. "Sheriff, does the name Bruno mean anything to you? In connection with a lion?" The sheriff's weathered face changed. "Where'd you hear that name?" Caroline showed him the bracelet. "Well, I'll be damned," he muttered. "That'd be Eva Silverman's lion. Or was, years ago." "Eva Silverman?" "Strange case. Family lived out in the Blacktail Canyon area. Real reclusive types. About 16 years back, the father found an orphaned mountain lion cub mother had been poached. Instead of reporting it, they raised it alongside their daughter. Eva was just a girl then, maybe 12. That lion Bruno, they called him, grew up more dog than wild animal. Rangers found out eventually, tried to relocate him, but he kept coming back. Finally, they got some special permit given how tame he was. Unusual situation." "What happened to Eva?" Caroline asked. "Left town about 5 years ago after her parents passed. There was talk she'd married some wildlife photographer. Haven't heard the name in years." Sheriff Parker scratched his stubbled chin. "You don't think?" The implication hung in the air between them. "I think," Caroline said carefully, "that whatever happened out there in the storm, that lion saved this baby's life and knew exactly where to bring her." V. Late afternoon brought the sound of an approaching vehicle, a four-wheel drive truck, navigating the freshly plowed hospital access road. Caroline looked up from feeding the infant just as Sheriff Parker stepped into the room. "We found something," he said grimly. "Or rather, someone." Behind him stood a man Caroline had never seen before, tall, bearded, his face haggard with exhaustion and grief. His left arm was wrapped in a makeshift splint, and his clothes bore the rumpled look of someone who had been wearing them for days. "This is Jake Sanders," the sheriff introduced him. "He's been trying to reach us since the storm hit." The man stepped forward, his red-rimmed eyes fixed on the bundle in Caroline's arms. "Is that?" His voice cracked. "Is that my daughter?" Caroline instinctively tightened her hold on the infant. "You're her father?" Jake Sanders nodded, tears welling in his eyes. "Her name is Lily, Lily Sanders. Is she all right?" Dr. Miller stepped forward. "She's doing remarkably well, Mr. Sanders, but we need to understand what happened. How did your daughter end up being carried here by a mountain lion?" Jake's legs seemed to give out beneath him. He sank into the nearest chair, running his trembling hands through his disheveled hair. "Then it's true," he whispered. "Bruno really did it. Eva always said he would protect Lily if anything happened, but I never." His voice broke completely. Caroline moved to sit across from him, still cradling the baby. "Tell us what happened, Mr. Sanders." Jake drew a deep, shuddering breath. "My wife Eva and I were driving back from visiting her aunt in Helena when the storm hit. We were trying to make it to the main highway when our truck slid off that old logging road in Blacktail Canyon. The truck rolled down an embankment." He gestured to his splinted arm. "I was thrown clear, but Eva and Lily were trapped inside." He paused, visibly struggling to continue. "By the time I got back to them, Eva was. She was badly injured. The baby was miraculously unharmed. We were miles from help. The storm was worsening, and Eva knew." His voice caught. "She knew she wasn't going to make it." Caroline remembered the bracelet. "Eva grew up here, didn't she? With a lion named Bruno?" Jake looked up in surprise. "Yes, she always said Bruno was more family than pet. He disappeared into the wild years ago when the rangers tried relocating him, but Eva swore he still watched over her family's old property. She'd leave food out sometimes, talk to the forest like he could hear her." His expression softened at the memory. "I thought it was just her way of connecting with her past. Eva gave birth to Lily just 3 days before we started our trip home," he continued. "She made this strange request before we left, insisted on bringing an old wooden bracelet she'd carved years ago. Said she needed to introduce Lily to the mountains, to Bruno." A bitter laugh escaped him. "I thought it was just new, mother sentiment." Caroline silently produced the wooden bracelet. This was with Lily when she arrived. Jake took it with trembling hands, tears streaming freely down his face. "After the accident, when Eva realized she was dying, she made me promise to take Lily and find shelter. But I couldn't leave her alone to die," we argued. "She kept saying, 'Bruno will know what to do.' In her final moments, she tied this bracelet into Lily's blanket." He closed his eyes, reliving the horror. "I passed out from my injuries shortly after Eva died. When I woke up hours later, the baby was gone. I've been searching frantically ever since, barely able to walk, convinced I'd lost them both. I never imagined." "Your wife knew," Caroline said softly. "Somehow she knew Bruno would find your daughter and bring her to safety." Jake stared down at his daughter's peaceful face, then at the bracelet clutched in his hand. "May I?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Caroline carefully transferred the sleeping infant into her father's arms. Jake held his daughter with reverent care, pressing his lips to her forehead as tears fell from his eyes onto her blanket. "Thank you," he whispered, though whether to the hospital staff or to an absent lion, Caroline wasn't certain. Zick. A week later, Caroline found herself driving along a snow-covered forest road toward the Sanders cabin. Jake had been discharged from the hospital after treatment for his broken arm and mild hypothermia, and little Lily had proven to be a remarkably resilient baby. The authorities had documented the extraordinary circumstances of her rescue, creating quite a stir in Willow Creek and beyond. Caroline had volunteered to check on them as part of the hospital's rural outreach program, but her motives weren't entirely professional. Something about this story about the bond between a woman and a wild creature strong enough to transcend death had awakened something in Caroline's grief-numbed heart. The cabin sat nestled among tall pines, smoke curling from its chimney. Jake met her at the door, Lily bundled snugly against his chest in a carrier. "Nurse Evans," he greeted her with a tired smile. "Please, come in." They talked for a while about Lily's feeding schedule and Jake's plans. His sister was arriving from Seattle the following day to help until he could manage one-handed with the baby. "I've decided to stay," he told Caroline. "This was Eva's childhood home. She always wanted to raise our children here, surrounded by the mountains she loved." After completing her medical check of both father and daughter, Caroline hesitated by the door. "Mr. Sanders, Jake, there's something I'd like to do before I leave, if you don't mind." He looked at her questioningly. "I'd like to walk to where the forest begins, just for a moment." Understanding filled his eyes. He nodded. The afternoon sun cast long blue shadows across the pristine snow as Caroline made her way to the edge of the clearing. The forest before her was silent, primeval, stretching endlessly between mountain ridges. She stood there, breath-forming clouds in the cold air, and simply listened. Then she saw a set of large paw prints in the snow, fresh enough that the edges hadn't yet crystallized. They emerged from the forest, circled the perimeter of the clearing within the tree line, and disappeared back into the woods. Near where the tracks returned to the forest, Caroline noticed something unusual. A young pine sapling had been deliberately bent into a perfect circle, its flexible trunk twisted but not broken, forming a ring that would remain as the tree grew. Caroline smiled, touching the wooden bracelet she'd kept in her pocket. Jake had insisted she keep it when she'd tried to return it to him. "Eva would want you to have it," he'd said. "You were there for Lily when neither of us could be." Caroline knelt by the circle of bent pine, placing the wooden bracelet at its center. "You kept your promise, Eva," she whispered to the silent forest. "And so did Bruno." As she turned to walk back to her car, Caroline felt a sense of peace she hadn't experienced since Robert's death. In a world where even the wildest creatures could remember love and honor promises, perhaps there was room for her own heart to thaw from its long winter. From deep within the forest, too distant to pinpoint, came the soft, low sound of a mountain lion's call, not threatening, but acknowledging. Caroline smiled and continued walking, knowing that somewhere in these ancient woods, Bruno kept his silent watch. In the days and years that followed, rangers would occasionally report unusual lion behavior near the Sanders property, deer left on the porch during harsh winters, dangerous predators found mysteriously driven away, and once, a child's red ball gently pushed back from the forest edge after it had rolled away during play. The locals of Willow Creek added the story to their folklore, embellishing it with each telling. But Caroline knew the unadorned truth was miraculous enough. Love, whether human or animal, recognized no boundaries. It simply found a way, even through the deepest snow, to keep its sacred promises.